From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building dreams with passion, drive, and speed. From service to success, we're here to inspire the quest. Dog tags to ownership, we're the best. Take the prize.
From the battlefield to the boardroom, this is Dog Tags to Ownership, the podcast where veterans share their journeys from serving our nation to leading in business. Hear inspiring stories of grit, growth, and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives those who've served to succeed. Tune in and take the first step toward your own mission in entrepreneurship.
Military One Percenters, welcome to Dog Tags to Ownership, where once a week we interview veterans who charted a path towards entrepreneurship. Here, our goals are to share resources, advice, and success stories about starting a business, discuss strategies for building financial independence and creating your own path, and most importantly, build a community to support each other through the challenges of transitioning from service life to civilian ownership. Happy 2026! And to start off our second season, we are extremely excited to introduce our guest to the show, Rick Franco. Rick is a Marine Corps veteran, former CIA contractor, and a founding member of Four Branches Bourbon, the only spirits company founded by veterans from the four branches of the United States military. Rick, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much today for joining us to discuss your journey from dog tags to ownership. How are you doing?
Doing great. I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's an honor to be on here. I've been looking forward to this.
This is our first episode of season 2 in 2026, and it's crazy. It kind of comes full circle. So when we were first reaching out to folks to bring on the podcast, one of the first places we reached out to was Four Branches, and I think we got a no from your
PR company.
But I was telling Matt, it all comes full circle. Here we are a year later, and we're getting to talk to you about Four Branches Bourbon and the great spirit that you guys are putting out there and on the market. Before we get into that and you guys starting the business, could you first tell us a little bit about yourself and your military service?
Yeah, Julie. I'll compress 30 years into a pretty quick nutshell. So a little bit, I enlisted in the reserves. So I started off as an enlisted Marine. Kind of wanted to learn the ropes. I went to school, VMI, Virginia Military Institute, where then I received a commission as a Marine Corps infantry officer. Did 2 tours, a fleet tour, and the first conflict I was in Kosovo. So we were part of the Kosovo campaign in the late 90s. Then I did a B billet in New Orleans as an active duty infantry officer in the reserves, or working for the reserve component, where I was fortunate enough, and it's kind of what led me down this path. I ran all the counter narcotics for the Marines, the Marine Corps, all the counter drug missions at that time back in the early 2000s, from South America up to Texas border. And that's kind of how then after 9/11, 2002, a little more reserve time, but then I end up transitioning out of the Marine Corps, which I think we'll discuss that transition a little bit later. But transitioned out, and then ended up eventually being recruited into the CIA as a contractor, where I did over a dozen years. A little bit of broken times. Everybody on this podcast that's listening on will know what that is. A little bit of broken time with them on several occasions. But did that until 2017, 18, and got out. And so that's a little bit of my military career. There's quite a few different transition points throughout. So this might be a pretty good podcast for people, because I've done it more than once and transitioned multiple times, so to speak.
Yeah, do you want to get into that a little bit, Rick? I guess initially your transition from the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Were you already lined up to get in with the CIA, or was that?
No, I wasn't. So when I ES'd mid to late 2002, right? At that time, at least my experience was, especially as a Marine officer, there was not really a good transition plan. Like I think it's evolved now, right, in the military. It was pretty much thanks, appreciate it, good luck, Captain, because I got out as a captain. Good luck, go do good things. So it was really hard, right? So transition, I was doing the job fairs and the resume writing and trying to figure out, for me, there was no real direction. And so I ended up going to this job fair company that specialized in junior officer transitions. And I fell into, or I ended up, my very first civilian job was building homes, superintendent for a big home builder out of Texas. Absolutely the greatest experience to know what I absolutely did not want to do, right? So it taught me everything I didn't want to do. And it was really hard, and I struggled at that time with a lot of feelings of, you're thinking, hey, I left as, an infantry officer. I've jumped out of planes. I've led the finest fighting forces in the world. And I'm on my hands and knees scraping paint flecks off some homeowner's house because, the painter dropped a speck of paint. And I'm scratching my head going, what are you doing? Right. So it was really a lot of self-struggle there. I did that for about 9 months. And then I received a phone call. I was lucky back where the command I had transitioned out of, we're standing up the first anti-terrorism force protection contract. And I got the call and said, hey, you want to come back as a contractor in the building? I was like, absolutely. In fact, as soon as I said yes, I went in and told the guy I was working for, I was like, took him to lunch and said, today's my last day. Thanks. Appreciate it. Goodbye. And packed my stuff. Went back to the command. It was very interesting because I was no longer, at that time, I eventually got promoted to major, but I was no longer Captain Franco. I was Mr. Franco. And it was really a neat transition when you walk in a suit and tie working for a big defense firm, how, all of a sudden, at that time, the senior ranking officers were calling me sir, and were very interested in what I was doing and how, because they were going to transition soon. And wow, he's in the door. So it was a really interesting dynamic, but the transition was hard. It was really, really hard. It was one of the toughest things I did. And so then that job, because the position I was in, led me down the path of different schools. I'd gotten back in the reserve, so I was bouncing around between. So I transitioned, but then I fell back into it because I got back into the military, kind of had one foot still. One weekend I'd be a green suiter in uniform at, this special operations school or this school or that. The next weekend I was in a business course in a suit and tie, learning about contract procurement, whatever it may be. So, but that led me down to the path of getting recruited into the agency. So to answer your question, man, I that was not lined up. It was that 100% happenstance or fate or whatever you want to call it. Right. And it just, I fell into that. And what I realized, and so I did that for a long time, within a division of the CIA program. I did for a long time, and served our country in a much needed but very different capacity than our brothers and sisters in uniform. So that, when I say I transitioned in and out, I fell back into a paramilitary unit for all practical purposes. So it was the best of everything you did. If you were, for me, a grunt and, an infantry officer, best tools, the coolest whiz bangs, all the great stuff without the big green machine bureaucracy, because I was a contractor. So it was great. But what it was a crutch for a long time.
You said it luck earlier and you said happenstance, but I have to believe that your work ethic, your reputation when you were in the Marine Corps, and then when you transitioned out and folks came to find you for that particular position, you obviously built and made a lot of connections throughout your time. And again, I go back to probably your reputation that preceded you to get into other positions. So some may call it luck, but I got to think you had a lot to do with that.
First of all, thank you. Great compliment. But, I think we at this level really don't compliment ourselves or talk much about ourselves, but it definitely laid the foundation for being able to get in. Right. And then kind of when I was in, because I was in that program where majority of 90, I'm going to say, I'll make up the number, but I think it was 90 plus or more they primarily pulled from the enlisted ranks, right? They pulled from the doers, right? We're not necessarily always, as an officer, a door kicker, right? We lead from the front, we're there, but only for a short period of time. Our job is to lead, command, control. It's not necessarily being the first guy through the door. So the program pulled a lot from the special operations community of guys that had been through it. So I was one of, as far as I know, in my time in the program, one of maybe 4 or 5 officers that ever made it through or into the program. So that, to your point, work ethic, that allowed me quickly to ascend the ranks within that organization as well. But it wasn't a true separation, right? It was still a very comfortable factor because you're working with guys from different branches of the military, all like-minded, rock stars, all guys that bring their game every day that you can depend, your life depended on them, right? It's just 2 of you. So, but that taught me a lot as I transitioned away from it. But to your point, going all the way back, yes, I transitioned the first time and learned exactly what I didn't want to do, but then I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And when this opportunity presented itself, it felt really comfortable.
I think and I think for our listeners, that's perfectly acceptable. And I think it happens more often than not that we do find ourselves going into something that we know and we're comfortable with. The harder move is the unknown and, the things we haven't done before. But I know we'll get into that too.
Oh, so that was the very first transition. And I told you I had broken time. And it was a broken time from the agency that really helped me define and become an entrepreneur and become, make a, lack of a better word, a clean break, so to speak. That and family. I want to continue to keep have a family, right? You can't deploy for 8 years and keep going and going and going. At some point, it catches up to you. In the agency, did time, got out in 2000, went from 2008 to 2014 in Afghanistan, straight in and out, in and out, in and out, back to back to back to back to back. I think when I finally finished the program, I had 36 to 38 hostile deployments. So I left the first time in 2014 because I got married and I was going to have a son. And I once again went through the hiring process and made it through a pretty rigorous selection. To your listeners are going to think I hit the jackpot, but to take a job down the Bahamas. So I went from the desert to the Bahamas, right? I'm interviewing in Afghanistan. I throw on a shirt, a tie, a pair of gym shorts with a beard on a call like this for this particular company. But I transitioned into that, and that really taught me a lot about being on the outside, I'll call it. Because for a year I was down as a contractor, another contractor, running a very high-end private security for a private resort island. Very high-end, very ultra high net worth. So, and all my team was all local Bahamians. I quickly found out in the first 2 weeks they had no formal training. So I was taking raw recruits, for lack of a better word, and falling back on my military career and training them and creating a program, at the same time interacting with upper management and high net worth individual clients. So I learned an extreme amount, once again, about myself, about what I wanted to do, about what I didn't want to do. And I took that experience for a year, and then it just became untenable to stay there. Went back to the States, and then the phone rang again. And it was the guys from the agency calling saying, "Hey, heard you're back off the island. Do you want to come back to work for us?" And it was a different capacity, same thing, just a little bit different capacity, a very unique capacity. And I said, a buddy of mine was running that program. I said, yeah, you know what? Let's go. So I did 2 more years. And then finally, it was taking a toll. And I transitioned for what I'll call the third time out, where I was then asked to become the chief operations officer for a nonprofit out of Montana, which ironically, he had been a contractor who'd worked for me in Afghanistan. I'd been his boss in Afghanistan. So now I was going to work for him. And once again, it's a little bit of gravitating towards what you know. Right now I'm working with veterans. I'm a veteran. I'm working with combat veterans that are going through what arguably to this day is still probably one of the most rigorous, intense veteran PTS programs out there. The motto is, it's not a vacation, which truly wasn't. Did that for a year as a nonprofit, which was excellent. So the organization that I was a chief operation officer for was heroesandhorses.org out of Montana. They still hold, Mike, I think, still has the record. I mean, their program is over 40 days. So that's a pretty intensive. At the time, we only took cohorts of 8, 3 groups of 8, 24 veterans for the summer, because you can't go past September. It's too cold. Too much snow comes in the mountains, because we're in the back country majority of the time. We were. So transitioned out of that, and then, came back, left Montana, came back to, my wife's family's from Iowa. So we went back to Iowa. And ironically, once again, I was gravitating towards, hey, you didn't retire. Why don't you go and finish out your time? This time as a contractor, why don't you become a staff officer? Why don't you go back to government service, buy your military time back, do your X amount of years in the government, and get a full retirement? That's a safe, easy thing, right? At least in my mind. And so then I applied back to the agency, and they're like, yeah, come on. Well, we'll hire you on not as a contractor, but as a true GS, worker, which everything was in motion. 4 branches probably wouldn't have started had COVID not hit. COVID hit, everything came to a grinding halt. And then wasn't sure what was going to happen. Got a call to if I would want to take a position in Nashville, Tennessee, running a security team similar to the one in the Bahamas, just in Nashville for a sister property. So 5 years later, here I am. So I would say it's been a successful transition at that point, but it took a couple of, I'm out, no, I'm back in, and I'm out. And each time, if you're listening, you'll learn something, right? The biggest thing to walk away is knowing what you don't want to do. Everyone asks, what do you want to do? I got friends that are still in, I got friends that are going, I got a couple of friends that are colonels and lieutenant colonels. I'm like, what are you going to do? And they have no idea. Most of us don't. And that's okay. But figure out what you don't want to do so you don't waste time.
Yeah, I think it's like the age-old question, right? Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's what everybody always says whenever you're getting out of the military is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think you bring up tons of great points about how you went through the process and transitioned from Marines, Reserve, IA agency, back and forth, and all those things. I guess with Four Branches, how did that come about on the idea? I know you can go on the website and you read you guys' story and things, but from your perspective, like how did that idea come about and how did you get the ball rolling for starting Four Branches Bourbon?
So, Four Branches, the seeds were planted 30 years ago. It took 26 years for those seeds to germinate. And then they were planted while I went to school at Virginia Military Institute because of the friendships and relationships there that transitioned from not only school, but then into the Marine Corps with another buddy of mine, both infantry officers, and then into the CIA. I was ahead of him and I recruited him. So it started that long ago. It just took that long for it to come about. And it was truly, how do I put this? I'll tell the listeners out there because you'll probably hear it and you can read on the site. But if you hear voices in your head, usually I'm going to tell everybody listening, don't listen to them. Bad idea, guys and gals, right? Bad idea. Run the other way. But every now and then one will make sense. So quite simply put, Four Branches originally started as a voice in my head driving home from my current job to do a barrel bourbon for the guys in the program. That came from. I told you it started 26 years ago because I'd gone to school at Virginia Military Institute. There with another cadet. We were lieutenants together at Lejeune doing dumb lieutenant shit, running around, commissioned. And I got recruited in the agency and then I recruited and vouched Greg. And actually December 7th of this year, 20 years ago, day one, night one out the wire, saved everyone's life, did what he was trained to do, but didn't come home. And then I brought him home. So that stayed with me, right? And he was given a star. And then since that time, 5 more guys on the star, all contractors, which was unprecedented. It changed policy within the CIA. He was the first. It changed because from that division, no contractor had ever been given a star. So it truly changed agency policy. So that's where Four Branches started. And then how did and look, I didn't know what I was doing, right? I probably still don't know what I'm doing, right? Because I had no idea how hard it would be to start a bourbon company. But what I did know, and you learn this in the military, is that if you might not know the answer, but you'll figure out where to go find the answer. And you'll figure out real quick, you might not be able to hold the line. So I might need some reinforcements. And so that's pretty much what I did. I ended up calling one of my friends, and his son and I served together, ironically, on the same CIA base, but he and I had been in the same branch at different times of the agency. And we had worked in the civilian world together, and he's the Air Force component of it. So we started talking, and then we joke, and so everyone out here is in the Navy, please, no disrespect, but we said, hey, everybody needs a Navy SEAL these days. So we called Harold, who's our Navy SEAL, retired Command Master Chief, 33 years. I spent a lot of time in different teams, and the 3 of us came together, and then it was kind of you got 3 knuckle draggers like, hey, wait a minute, if we have one more guy, we might actually have 4 of the branches. So a mutual friend put us in touch with our Army compadre. But we didn't know anything other than, hey, we have an idea and we want to do this as a give back and an honor or tribute. Grew it from my tribute, which is the roots of giving back to what I call the unsung shadows, the Greg Wright Jr.'s, the Tyrone Woods of the world from the agency to the message is bigger, right? And so then we decided to create a bigger message. But really, as far as the business aspect of it, we didn't really know what we were doing. So we immediately took our skill sets. Like, what skill sets do you have in the military that you can apply into the civilian world when you transition out? You have discipline. right? So you have the discipline to know I need to be disciplined and diligent and stay the course and do all the small things that's going to take, right? The paperwork, the administrative. I'm going to make the phone calls. I'm going to we all come from a little bit of intelligence backgrounds. I'm going to seek out the best and kind of create your target list and a target package. If, who do you need to go talk to? Maybe we're not going to take them out. Now I'm going to seek them for help. And it's really, those are the skills that that I guess I take it for granted, right? We take it for granted, second nature at this point in a career. But if you're out there listening, you have such inherent skills that so many people that didn't serve don't have. That's why you're 1%.
So, and Rick, I know you said you didn't know, you guys didn't know anything. So why bourbon? Was there just a passion there? You enjoyed bourbon, or you visited distilleries, or how did that
Matt,
come?
honestly, like I tell you, a voice in the head, man, going off a voice, going off a calling, a voice. I grew up in a Scotch family. My dad drinks Scotch. I had never, I was not a big bourbon drinker. Right. But it to me, when it said bourbon, when it's like, hey, do a barrel, because I thought it would be very easy. And bourbon, now reflecting on it, bourbon is the American spirit. It's the truest American spirit. It's older than U.S. military. And maybe this is why it was bourbon. When you hear that voice, it's a reflective spirit. We think it's a reflective spirit. You sit around the kitchen table, you sit around the campfire, you pour a sip and you have a conversation. That's why bourbon. Fast forward 3 years now, I couldn't say, I couldn't think of like, well, hey guys, let's sit around the campfire and have a bottle of gin. One going to work for us, right? It didn't. So that's why bourbon, it just, whatever it may be, intervention, it was bourbon. It had to be bourbon. And it made sense as we got into it. Like, it is the American spirit. It speaks to all the branches. It's kind of what we did as a toast coming back from a mission, or for those that didn't come home, raise a glass. It wasn't going to be gin or vodka or tequila.
And Rick, you discussed, as you were talking about how you got started and the four of you coming together and coming up with your target list of people to reach out to better figure out how to run this business. Could you just talk about some of those first people that you really reached out to help you guys get this Four Branches bourbon off the ground and what that was like for you all?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple key names in there. Like I said, we didn't know what we were doing, really. So we did a lot of research, right? To create that target list, identify your subject, and understand. We were devouring information left and right, trying to understand it, trying to read about it. And I couldn't have picked a more complicated industry to go into. The alcohol industry is besides firearms, is the second most regulated industry in the United States. Every state is different. Every market is different. It's not one size fits all. So, great. Marine picks the hardest one to go into. So we were doing, it was a real challenge, having the discipline, the confidence to pick up a phone and just start making phone calls. Like, hey, would somebody talk to me? Hey, I'm trying to get, and for about 2 months, we didn't get a phone call back. I couldn't get any distillery from a website to call us. And I was like, is this going to happen? My next course of action was like, hey, where do we need to buy a ticket to? And who do we need to knock on? Whose door do we need to go kick in? And I distinctly remember at the airport waiting to pick up the in-laws. Finally, I was able to get through to Barstown Bourbon Company. This guy picked up the phone, said, was asking. I was like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm looking for. And this is kind of our concept. And I'm thinking I'm being very secretive. I don't want to give away everything we're trying to do. It's just like, I'm interested in purchasing bourbon. How do we do this? And then I quickly was like, hey, by the way, were you ever in the military? I hate to say it, play the veteran card, right? See, we flash it like, hey, let's see if we get the same signal. He's like, he was in the Army. Great guy. So we started talking, and then I was like, look, I need to figure out how do we buy barrels? I had no idea. You just can't go on Amazon and buy a barrel of bourbon. So he's like, hey, here's a list of numbers. Called the first number. No one answered. Called the second number. A gentleman by the name of Jeff Hopmayer picks up. Jeff Hopmayer owned the Brindiamo Group, largest bourbon brokerage in the world. Picks up and I start talking to him, kind of like we're talking. And as I'm going through the conversation, I was like, well, hey, sir, you know what? If you don't mind, I'll send you this NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And because that's the world we came from, right? We came from this whole siloed intelligence world, so to speak. So that was common practice. And he's like, hey, I don't do NDAs, so we can have this we can stop this conversation right here. I was like, you know what? Today we don't do NDAs either. He's like, smart answer. So literally the next thing he says is like, hey, why don't you come to my house? I was like, I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, is this guy insane? He doesn't even know who we are. So my business partner flew in, one of my partners flew in, and we went to Jeff Hotmayer's house. He'd never met us, didn't know who we are, anything other than what we told him. Brought us into his house, sat at his dining room table, and for 2 hours, he tried to talk us out of going into the bourbon business, literally. And I guess we were just, too dumb, too stupid, too hard-headed, too passionate to quit. So we walked away from there with the answers we needed on how to go about getting the barrels. He helped us out. And fast forward 3 years, he's now an investor and on our board because he saw what we're doing, believes in what we're doing. So he is probably, without Jeff's guidance, I don't know if we'd have been on the same path and trajectory we're on. That and the guys at Bardstown Bourbon Company, Mark Irwin, who's the CEO, Steve Nally, who's a master distiller. Without those two gentlemen, once again, we might not be where we are. And we've been very blessed and fortunate from those aspects. And then we sought out, it was through Jeff that we started seeking out the right people. It's taking your connections and going one deep. Who do you know that may know someone else, and start connecting these dots? So from Jeff, we got our CFO, fractional CFO, Tim Condon. He retired 30 years as the chief financial officer for Brown Forman. Brown Forman owns that little company called Jack Daniels. So it was from there. Then we got our senior advisor who retired as vice president of U.S. global operations for Jack Daniels, Brown Forman. And so we've assembled a really good team of former Brown Forman executives that they knew how to build business. Our chief sales and chief marketing officer started Woodford and grew that brand from nothing. So we're very fortunate to seek these gentlemen out, and that they believe in what we're doing. They do what they do for us at a very fractional cost of what they're worth. So we're blessed in that sense.
You and your business partner went and sat at the
Jeff's house. Yeah.
Jeff's house. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. At Jeff's house at his dining room table, and he tried to talk you out of getting into the bourbon industry. And I'm assuming he probably tried to talk you out of it because at that point, this was 2019, 2018,
No.
2020?
I wish it had been 2018 or 2019. No, this was like 2021.
Okay. 2021. So bourbon, that's at the point when bourbon is booming, basically.
Yep. Totally blew the Warren Buffett theory of buy when everything's cheap and sell when everything's high. No, we bought when everything was extremely high. We came in at the height of the bubble, right? When people were just buying up barrels. Barrels were skyrocketing. People thought, I buy $1,000 barrel bourbon today. Next year, it's twice as much. You can, triple X your money in 3 years. It's better than the stock market. So yeah, we learned some hard lessons there, but
Yeah.
we are
I find it,
outlasting a lot of other companies.
yeah, that's what I just find it remarkable. And I think based off of what I've read about you all, and you're located, or you do your distilling at Bardstown Bourbon Company in Louisville, or right out in Bardstown, Kentucky.
In Bardstown, yep.
Yeah, which is a lot different than some of the other folks or other bourbon companies, distilleries that got started at the same time as you, where they went in, they built their own distillery, try to do like a grassroots almost type of distillery in Kentucky. But you all found a partner, found somebody to work with, and do you believe that that's been beneficial for the growth of your company and really getting you going? And how do you think that that's going to help you grow and scale over the next 5 to 10 years with your bourbon?
Great question. So I'll use this analogy I use with a lot of people, and I'll ask you this question. Do you own a boat, or do you have a friend who owns a boat?
That's a great question.
Yes.
Julie owned the boat, and I was the friend that used the boat.
Smart.
That was that. But then we switched, Matt, and you owned the boat, and then I was the friend. So we've been both sides of this.
Touché.
We subscribe to that theory that it's better to have a friend that has a distillery. We knew we were not in a position, and did not want to be in a position to build a $25 to $250 million distillery, right? And because at least we had the foresight, and we were given the advice that they could see on the horizon that something was coming, a storm was coming. If we waited another 2 or 3 years, we could probably buy a distillery for a pretty good price right now, pennies on the dollar, because of what's happening out there. So partnering with a company like Bardstown that already had all the infrastructure made all the sense in the world. So we would become a non-producing distiller, and we would partner with them and source our barrels. And now we're actually laying down barrels while still continuing to source from Bardstown. We're all Kentucky now. That has strengthened our balance sheet and will help us in the next 5 to 10 years for sure, because we won't have to carry the operating cost of a major facility. And it gives us also the flexibility, right? A little bit of that light fighter mentality. We can be agile and flexible and flex and shift with the tides, where we're not tied to a brick and mortar facility, which allows us to perhaps, instead of a distillery, look at a tasting room, which makes all the sense in the world for us down the road.
You chose a great brand and a great distillery at Bardstown. I mean, and they're newer, right? I mean, they're a bit of or have they been there for?
I think Bardstown let's say the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
they're 10
So
years.
they in the big scheme of bourbon,
Yeah.
they're pretty new.
Yeah.
They're not like, they're not Heaven Hill or Jack Daniels or, a legacy, a multi-generational distillery at the moment.
And when you all first started with them and with the master distiller and getting your barrels of bourbon, the first one you started with was the Founders Blend, I believe. And then now you have 3 bourbons now. Okay. Yep. The Founders Blend.
This is Founders Blend. So this is our main product. What we do have, I don't know if I've got on shelf. Yep, probably. We've come out with, so every year we come out with what's called an LTO, limited time offering, right? We need to be a little bit innovative. What's new? What's coming down the pipe? So we've released 2 limited time offerings. The first year was what we call Black Ops, and that was a tribute. Got one. I don't have one behind me. That was a tribute to a fellow colleague. This is a 9-year bottle, kind of a custom label a little bit, but we only did, I think, 500 of these. And it was a tribute to a fellow colleague who is a legendary CIA officer. And we nodded to his Caribbean roots because he's from Puerto Rico, Cuba, with finishing it in rum casks. And then this year, our release was for the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps turning 250. And we called that the Continental. So from a business strategy plan, we look to release one special release every year, but continue to have like one main product for right now and one release every year that people hopefully will start collecting. And there'll be a collection of 4 branches bottles, like you see some of these other bourbons like Weller or Blanton's with the little different horses that they have.
And Rick, I was just reflecting a bit on what you were saying earlier about, your focus, I think, and desire to do this, like I guess the why behind it, seems to have kept you very focused on how you've gotten to where you've gotten today. And by that, I mean, you didn't go out there and try to build something from the ground up. You had an end state in mind. And I feel like you stayed fairly laser focused on getting there, even when the advice was to not continue with this passion project, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like why you went the route you did? And I know it has a bit to do with balance sheets and upfront money probably to get it going. But can you talk about, I guess, just a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of the company?
Yeah. The passion and the reason, the why, right? And that's a big thing when we transition, right? I'll tie it into transitioning. So the original why for me was to honor Greg and the men on that wall, honor the unsung shadows. That is our North Star. That's my North Star. That will continue to guide me. That's why I was like, when people tell you can't do something or you shouldn't do something, I'm a little bit stubborn that way. I'm like, okay, I'll show you. I can do this, right? That's why we've adopted the mentality. It really is that this is a no-fail mission for us. 2 parts. One, the nuts and bolts piece is that we took dollars from people. People bet on us. We were fortunate enough, and we're in our 3rd raise, but our first 2 raises, we're only 2.5 years old. Our first 2 raises, we raised $2.4 million. The first 1.3 was friends and family that, look, there wasn't even a bottle. There wasn't a label, and we didn't even have the juice picked out, right? So that they were betting on Rick, Mike, Harold, and RJ and our backgrounds and our work ethic and the things the past performance of our careers. So that's 1. 2 is that when we started this and we decided to make it bigger than a 1-unit barrel, a 1 organization barrel, we identified that we needed to do something in the veteran community because we're all veterans and we're very passionate about the community. And we needed to change the message. We almost didn't go into this business, not because it would be too hard, it was too expensive, too complicated. We almost didn't go into it because the year we were starting, we had friends that took their lives. And we know, and alcohol played a big part in that. It plays a big part in men and women making what I call fatal decisions, right? And that's why we said, it's got to stop. And if we're going to go into this industry, none of us wanted to be seen as perpetuating the problem. This wasn't going to become blood money for us. So we said, we have to change the message and we have to do it differently. I tell my kids, you bring me a problem, you better bring me a solution or at least an option. So that's what we've done. We identified a problem. We said, okay, let's now bring a solution to the alcohol industry and to the veteran first responder military community that, to our knowledge, hasn't ever been done. And that's why we say, and it's where our messaging comes from, it's where our trademarks come from. That's why we say, we serve our country, you're serving your country, but we believe everybody serves a community. So on every bottle, we say serve honorably. And then we say drink honorably. And what we're trying to change the message is that it's not a drink responsibly. It's a different message. Very important, but different for us. And what we want people to understand is, look, if you're the last one to come back from downrange, and this audience understands when I say that, don't dishonor the memories of the men and women that didn't come home, right? We're here. I'm here. But more importantly, you are here. So don't dishonor your own memory by doing something fatal. And that's why we ask every single person out there, look, quit drinking to forget. We've been there. We want you rather sip to remember. That is the message, right? And I want people to understand it's not just a sip to remember the Gregs in our lives that didn't come home that night. I want you to sip to remember the birth of your child, recently separating from the military and retiring, a promotion. Look, pick the moment, right? Pick the moment. Friends getting together. I just saw a buddy of mine I hadn't seen in 30 years. He went in the Army as a Green Beret, and we met up Sunday. He surprised me at a tasting I was doing, Total Wine. Sure as hell went to a restaurant that had 4 branches and had a sip to remember and caught up over 30 years. That's what this is for. Mm-hmm. That's the message we want to put out there to everybody and change that message. That's why it's so important to us as a business also to give back. And that's the real why, right? And so when you transition, you find your why, then there's nothing that's going to stop you. Because you have a why, you have a new mission, you have a purpose. So for me, I believe my partners, because we all got in this together, it's now to change that message. It's to make a positive impact in this community to where hopefully we can reduce those numbers. That truly is the message for us, and always to remember.
And I think that's so powerful, Rick. And I know it's all over your website. It's on almost all of your social media branding is sip to remember. And just taking that time to sort of celebrate those things. And I think when we were speaking before, just getting to know each other a little bit, we were talking about the 4 branches founders blend and why you guys created that. And I believe what you said was it's for those times of people retiring, those big celebration times for people to have that bottle. And I had told you that I gave somebody who just retired as a colonel after 33 years, I gave him a bottle of 4 branches for his retirement gift. And you said that was one of the big things for you all as a company is giving back and having people have, the 4 branches of service, but also that sip to remember. And can you talk a little bit about, like, I know you went into it to change to change the stigma for 22 a day and people taking the fatal decision, but just you guys' marketing towards that and like how you are giving back to the veteran and military community.
Yeah.
With 4 branches?
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Yeah. So, right off the bat, we give back as a company. So you'll notice 4, like we really lean into the 4, right? And it's everything from the bourbon being a 4-grain bourbon, right? It's got 4 grains that make it up to there's 4 of us that served in 4 different branches, but I'll throw this out there. I say, I know there's more than 4 branches. I just tell people, you pick your branch. This is the community's bourbon. You just pick your branch. I just happen to be, the 4 of us happen to be in the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. But if you're in Coast Guard or Space Force, it's yours too. You can call it yours. But we give back, so 4 is important. So we give back 4% of our gross off the top every year to different veteran, military, first responder nonprofits. When we start the company, we said, okay, we're going to do this, change the message, but how do we do that? How do we impact that? How do we make a difference also is by, let's take some of our profits, or not even profits, let's take some of the money off the top revenue and let's give it to the organizations that are making a difference. Like Folds of Honor, we just did a very special collaboration with them, and we give 4% back to them. So we pick, we don't have a set number. It's just, does someone fall in our mission parameters, and can we afford to give them at that time, is what we do. Also donated a lot of bottles. So we give away a lot of these bottles to, hey, I have a fundraiser. would give us a bottle? 9 out of 10 times we do. Right. And then these bottles, and we've been very humbled. In 2 years, the bottles we've given away have auctioned off for over $600,000.
Awesome.
When you see a bottle, like we saw a bottle go for $29,000 at an event. Obviously it's the right room, but it's the message. It's the message and the meaning. And that's why people are bidding 10,000, 5,000, 400, 300, 29,000, 66,000 for 3 bottles when we launched in DC. So, and that money has all gone back to those nonprofits that are helping the veteran, military, and first responder communities. That's really important for us. We're not a nonprofit. I will say that. I mean, we have to sell a bottle, because I tell people, if you don't sell the product, then the story doesn't get told. The mission isn't accomplished. So it's a fine line between running the company and learning all that and leaning on those resources and then giving back.
And I will say, you guys make a fine bottle of bourbon. For everyone out there, I think your price point's around the $80, $90 price point for the founders.
80 and down. So, if you're on a base, AAFES took us in. Look, a lot of things have happened too that we've been very blessed and fortunate, right? That just, they don't happen every day. I mean, we talk to brands that have been around 6-7 years, and they're not even in AAFES. Year 2, we're in AAFES, right? 92 locations worldwide. So AAFES will have it, I think, for about $70, $74, somewhere in there.
I think just, what you said about you take 4% off the top to give back to nonprofits to help veterans, it's well worth the price. The price point that you guys have on it, like I said, it's a great bottle of bourbon. And then just the fact that you're giving back to our community, I think is just amazing from that perspective. But I do know we're kind of getting out of time here. Before we get into our last 2 questions, Rick, is there anything else you want to tell our listeners or followers, or provide any insight or advice to them prior to us going to our last 2 questions?
I'll say, if you can, it's not easy. It's easier said than done. Trust me. If you can find your passion, if you can find your why, you will be successful. And you may go through 100 no's before you find the one yes, but you have to, take that military discipline and that perseverance and that grit, and you can do it. But it's not easy. I joke facetiously. I don't want you listeners to take it the wrong way, but sometimes I feel it's easier to get shot at than it is to do this business, because I can easily shoot back and identify the threat. This is just can become so complicated, so much. So it goes back to that, but stay that course if you can find it. And then from our company messaging, when you're out there this holiday season, don't drink to forget. Holidays can be tough for people, right? They can bring up a lot of memories. Sip to remember the good times. Sip to remember those memories that they may not be, you'll have to face them, but you got friends, you got family, you can reach out. But sip to remember the good times. That's what we're here for. Buddy up with family and friends.
I have to say one thing. I love that you said that. So as we're going into 2026, I think that should be our new motto. It is stealing it from you all, but sip to remember those times and those memories so that we can have many more to come.
Kind of coming full circle from the intro that Julie gave and the persistence to get you guys on the podcast. Coincidentally, through a friend of a friend of a friend, I'm sitting there talking to a guy, Aaron Eckerberg, we'll name drop him. And he's like,
we were at TBS together.
And he's like, we're talking about 4 branches. And he's like, I know Rick, and I can put you in contact. Just being open and having conversations, having real conversations with people can lead to situations like this, where we're sitting on this podcast this evening and having a great conversation with you. So putting yourself out there.
That's a big one, right? You guys were told no by our PR company, and then it came back full circle. So to your listeners out there, don't always take no for no. I mean, be persistent. And eventually, I mean, if it comes around too many times, okay, hey, I'm not going to go through that brick wall. It's not going to work. But there's, like my kids, when they were young, I'll use this analogy. If you had little kids, like Dory always said, there's always a way, Dory, find a way, right? Exactly. So look, I'm sensitive too. I can use those analogies, right? Not all big tough guy movies. I've watched Dory and Finding Nemo and all those good stuff. But no, yeah, you got to put yourself out there. And I tell my kids, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. If you never ask the question, I can guarantee you the answer will be no.
Just keep swimming, right?
That's right.
So
You too.
my question, my focus passion is in the real estate side of things. So I've listened to a lot of podcasts, audiobooks in that arena. Is there anything you'd recommend to the listeners that has maybe helped you get where you are today and be successful?
Yeah, there's a great book out there if you're thinking about starting a company, right? Because like I said, starting a company with co-founder, with partners, or by yourself, it's going to be extremely hard. You know, everyone always sees the end reward. They don't see the sweat and toil to get to that end reward. So the book that I've read, and I highly recommend, it's called The E-Myth. And I think I pulled up the author here. The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. Excellent book on entrepreneurship and the different personalities within each of us as an entrepreneur that you will face and go through to understand that if you're the dreamer, you still need the operations chief to do it. And if you're the operations chief, you still need the technician to know how to do it. So it's interweaving these personalities either within a partner dynamic or within yourself to truly run a company.
That's great. And I think you touched on it earlier, being in the military, it's not knowing everything, but it's knowing the right guy or gal to help you to pick up where,
100%.
to kind of balance out our strengths and weaknesses. So great. No, that's a great book.
Our last question of every episode, Admiral William McRaven authored the book, Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World. So Rick, do you make your bed every morning?
Well, that's a silly question. Absolutely. Every day. Not only do I make my bed, I also make my kids make their bed. It's such a great statement though, right? It's little things you can control, right? To me, if you make your bed, you've made a statement that you control that space. I'll use battlefield terminology. You control the battle space. You've made the bed. The room is neat. It gives that it changes the feel, at least for me. When I look at the bed is made, the throw pillars are all put on there, the space changes. And it's like, okay, task one accomplished. If nothing else happens, I did one thing today. I got it done. And then it sets a tone for the day. So I do believe that making your bed makes a difference. It's a discipline thing, which you can hear the theme. I'm big on discipline. It's probably because the Marines hammered it into me over the years. But it's a discipline thing. And I think it is truly, hey, one thing done today. If the world goes to shit, well, I made my bed today.
Do you think that your other 3 co-founders make their bed every day?
I don't want to say I know the Navy. I know my Navy co-founder does. Navy, Marine Corps, we're tight. One team. Air Force, for sure, and Army. I'll give it to the Army. It might be questionable. You know, that's the fun part of having partners within the 4 branches. We give each other a lot of grief and a lot of shit, you know. And I'll tell Harold, Harold constantly reminds me that I'm part of the Navy. Marines are Department of the Navy. He constantly reminds me of that. And then I have to counter him and always tell him, yes, we are, Harold. We're the men's Department of the Navy.
See, I thought you were going to say the Air Force didn't make his bed.
Yeah.
That would be your one that didn't make the bed, but you gave him.
It's questionable, but he came from you're right. He may have had someone make his bed for him
There
in the
you
Air
go.
Force. So no, guys, it's been good. This has been a fun conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick, so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to spend an hour with us. I'll just say my day, I did make my bed, but being newly retired, I am still in that transition phase, of kind of figuring out what's next. And there's a lot of irons in the fire, but I was in a bit of a funk today. And I'll just say that this conversation with you and Julie has been fantastic and has just like made my night. So I'm looking forward to having that next sip as well of 4 branches. And I look very much forward to that.
Man, that's great to hear. And I hope that your listeners, none of it's easy. I use this analogy when I was I'll end with this when I was with the nonprofit. We as a country, as a fighting force, all the branches, I'll argue that the United States is the finest fighting military in the world. And we are really good, I say we, the country, of taking the kid from the Midwest, the kid from the city, the kid from the South, taking that plowshare and beating it and honing it into a razor's edge. We're really good. We've mastered that as a country. Where we're not so good at times is taking that sword and turning it back into a plow, right? And that's the hard part of transition, right? That at least my experience, that's been the very hard part, right? You've been turned into something great, right? We're 1%. We chose, and we're a volunteer force as a country, and we chose to do this for whatever reason. But when you step out of it, it is a different world, and it's very hard. But all the tools you've been given, all tools we've been given to face it, you have it within you. You have all that you need within you to do it. And then even better than that, you've developed brothers and sisters out there that you can pick up a phone and call, right? Because someone else has done it before you, and you can learn from them and lean on them. That's what makes us who we are. That's what makes what I call the veteran military first responder community so unique, is we have that capability. You just have to act on it.
Military One Percenters, whether you're brainstorming your first business idea, already running a company, or just curious about where to start, DogTags to Ownership is the place for you. Please hit that subscribe button to receive all new episodes. Also, if you know someone who has turned their dog tags into ownership, drop us a DM on social media or tag someone. We are always looking for new guests to bring onto the podcast. And as always, Military One Percenters, thank you for your service. Let's continue this journey and working together to write our next chapter. Until next week, keep pushing to turn those dog tags into ownership.
From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building dreams with passion, drive, and speed. From service to success, we're here to inspire the quest. Dog tags to ownership, where the bear